So let's go ahead and start because I'm not sure how many people will be able to turn up. This is something that we do on a monthly basis on the first Saturday, or in this case, Sunday of each month, with a rotating cast of panelists. So I'm Morris Allen. I'm the editor of Metaphorosis, which is a SFF magazine that comes out every Friday with a new story, as well as publishing monthly issues. And Fran, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Fran Eisemann, and I publish Cosmic Roots and Eldritch Shores, which is science fiction, fantasy, myths, legends, fairy tales, some eldritch spooky stories, and sometimes some articles and podcasts. So yeah, I guess that's it.
All right. Last time we had an interesting discussion of what exactly Eldritch means. I want to ask you that again. Yeah, let's go ahead and jump in. And I don't mean to put you guys on the spot, but if you run out of questions, we can come up with some, or we'll just see how it goes. So, does either of you have questions, Ron or Keach?
Are there audios on?
I can ask one to get things started, which is, I know that your slush piles must contain a lot of stories that are good but not good enough. So setting aside those that are just plainly, it's just bad, it's just badly done. What makes the difference between something that's good but not good enough for your magazine?
Fran, do you want to go ahead and start with that one, and I'll go next?
Okay. I mean, there's no one set thing that I could point to. Sometimes what makes it good is the idea, but the writing hasn't been polished down well, and one of the big things I find is that there are too many words. Usually things need to be edited down a good deal and make the word choice stronger and just refine the story. So it may often be that, well, that's got a lot of good elements there, but it's not completely worked out. So sometimes, I suggest that you think the story's done, but put it away in a drawer for a while and come back to it, a couple months later and read it out loud even and see, oh, wow, now I noticed this and this and this. So I think that's the main thing, is that the degree of development of the story.
I think from my side, there's a lot of things that go into this, and it depends obviously on the individual editor, their preferences in the magazine. I think that certainly I would agree with Fran that for us, at least, I put a lot of emphasis on style and the quality of the prose. And that's not to say that all of the stories are poetic and lyrical, but that's certainly what I would aim for. And that's one of the things that comes up a lot, is that the story is fine, the concept is good, the characters are okay, but the quality of the prose just isn't there to take it to the next level. And one of the things that is different for us from some magazines is that we do a lot of editing. I'm very hands-on. Every story goes through 4 or 5 rounds of editing. So what I'm looking for is stories that either are good from the start, but I haven't seen it yet. Or that I think I have an idea as to how to get them to a good place. And there are certainly some stories that I think, that's a good story and it's interesting. It's not quite there yet, but I don't know how to make it better. I can't pinpoint, if you change this, and the other thing, I will like it better. So those I sometimes reject just because I don't know what advice to give, but I also think the story isn't quite there. The larger majority, I have an idea of what to do with. But the things that come up often in the notes I make to myself are engagement, characters that are just not engaging.
Yes.
And
yes.
By this, I mean, I don't mean characters that are likable. I'm not particularly interested in whether they're likable, but I want them to be engaging. I want to know what the character values. What is it that's important to them? Even if they're awful characters, why are they doing this? What is important to them in all of this? So that's one thing is if I can't figure out what the characters want in life, then they're not very interesting to me. That's one thing. Another thing is the quality of the prose. Concepts are usually pretty good. The distinction I would make, I guess, on that is that if it's a story that's been done over and over again and the author isn't bringing anything new to it, unless it has terrific prose or wonderful characters or something else, then I'm just not going to be that interested. And we've got a long list, not a long list, but a medium list of don'ts, if you will, which are, I don't want to see vampire stories or werewolf stories or time travel stories. I get a lot of those anyway, even though I said, please don't send them to me, because I do leave the loophole that if you've done something really new with it, and I'm a writer too, I know it's like, oh, I think this is new, even if it's not, you know.
Yeah.
So there's some of that, but engagement and prose, I think, are the most common flaws that make a story not quite there. The other thing I guess I would say is that, I mean, I make my first determination about a story without looking at any of the names. But if I'm on the fence about it, I do look at the name and I look back and see, okay, what were their previous stories like? Because I score each story as we go through. And if from, well, I don't know, 1 to 10. And if I gave all their previous stories 2s or 3s, and I'm thinking this one's pretty good, it's I guess a little less likely that I will take that one on because I haven't seen the evidence. Maybe it's a fluke that this one is that good, and I worry that they won't be able to go through the 4 or 5 rounds of editing with me to get it all the way. So.
And I think one other thing is stories that just the writer hasn't read the guidelines at all, and maybe it's a good story, but it's definitely not what we're looking for. So I say always read the guidelines and understand, you know, like we don't like horror, we don't take horror stories. So yeah, just do that too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Fran can as well. We can all give you horror stories about people who haven't read the guidelines. Just a couple of weeks ago, we take up to 10,000 words, and it's a firm no. If it's 10,000, 100 words, then I'm saying no to it. But we had somebody submit a collection of stories of 200,000 words. It's like, we don't publish collections. We don't take more than 10,000. It had the person's name on it, I think, as well. We require anonymous. So you get a fair number of people who just, I don't know, can't be bothered. And, you know, if they can't be bothered to read our guidelines, I can't be bothered to publish them. So not that one was a closed call. Other questions, Keach? And you guys can feel free to turn on your video if you choose to, since there's only a few of us. But you don't have to.
Hi.
Hey, Ron. Keach, any questions from you, or would you prefer to lurk?
Oh, I was just curious about. I looked at Cosmic Root's acceptance rate, and it's a 99.6% rejection rate according to SFWA. So I'm wondering, is that because you get most of your stories directly from reaching out to authors, or do you really get, I mean, you're only open 2 days a month. How can you generate hundreds and thousands of rejected submissions in a 2-day window? How many people send you a story in that 2-day window? You really get 1,000 stories in 2 days?
No, I don't know. Maybe they're talking about over a long period of time. In 2 days, we probably get, I guess, 200 or more.
Oh, so you get 100 a day for your 2-day window.
Probably. I want to add a thing that counts the number of submissions from 1 to 100 to 400 to whatever. I know, like when we were open for a week at a time, there were just, it was too much. We want to be able to respond to all the stories within that month and have it all cleared before the next round starts. So there might be 200 or 300 that come in. And yeah, this yeah, the acceptance rate is very low.
I think
So-
that's true for most magazines, frankly, at least the ones that pay above a penny a word. Ours is something like 97 or 98% rejection as well, and I think that's true for most. I mean, I'm sure Clark's World is probably minuscule the amount that they accept, but I think that's probably a pretty accurate number, whether you're open a couple days a month like Fran is, or open all the time like we are. You know, you just get different numbers of stories per day submitted, but there's just a lot that don't make it.
Was there anything related to that question about the number of acceptances, or?
Well, we're not supposed to talk about specific submissions according to Morris's rules. I've received a couple of odd rejections from Cosmic Roots. The most recent one said that told me that I had submitted a story under nonfiction because the subtitle of the essay is a true horror story. But since it was actually an essay about writing, that indicated to me that whoever gave me a personalized response, I have to admit that, actually didn't read past the subtitle. So I submitted it as nonfiction. It's only 600 words long, and I got a similar rejection from you, not on fiction, nonfiction, but where it appeared that they were responding without having actually read the story, which, you know, if you get too many where you can't actually read the story or you don't like the title, that's fine. But I must say I haven't been very successful, even though I've gotten personalized responses from your magazine, in getting what I would call useful feedback.
Well, I don't know. I mean, every story gets read at least somewhat. They don't all get read all the way through. Some of them is a couple pages maybe, and it's very clear this isn't what we're looking for. So I don't know about your particular story. We read enough to decide it's not what we're looking for, and usually, you know, the response, well, that's the other thing, is that we're not here for the purpose of giving feedback. It's a courtesy that, and we understand art, like writers do need to know, why the heck am I constantly getting rejected? What is wrong with my story, or what is wrong with this magazine that won't accept me? So when writers ask for feedback, we usually give it, because we have a lot of readers and they give comments on the story for the editors to consider. But we're not here for the purpose of providing feedback. It's just a courtesy, and it doesn't always happen. So, you know, we're here to publish stories. So if you don't get feedback, it's, you know, it's not like something we've promised. And
No,
so
you have a high, once again, according to SFWA, you have a high percentage of personalized rejections compared to some people who just have a form letter that they send out to the 99 out of the 99.9% that they reject. My point was that, oh, actually, I think I forgot what my point was, but maybe I didn't have a point. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting that, where was I going with this?
you thought that your story was not horror, but we said it was horror and therefore rejected it.
No, it's an essay about the craft of writing, which you claimed was a story because the subtitle of the essay is a true horror story. which to me indicated that you didn't actually, that whoever read the story, whichever reader read the story, didn't actually bother to read, and it's not a story, didn't read the essay, which was only 601 words long.
Oh, well, that might be one reason right there. Our minimum is 1,000 words.
Oh, you know what? That's probably what I did wrong, is that, yeah, so if you have I think Morris also has a 1,000 minimum, is that correct?
I think it's 500 words now.
Oh,
We've
500,
gone back
right,
and
yeah.
forth a little bit, yeah. And I originally, we've gone through a number of changes, including on the feedback front and on reading it all the way. Those are two of the things that I've changed over time, just due to the amount of work. And I think other magazines go through some of this as well if they started that way. I read everything that comes in, and I'm the first reader for everything. And I used to read all stories all the way through and provide feedback for all stories as long as people requested it, which most people do. And those two things fell by the wayside over time. I just didn't have enough time.
Yeah.
The other thing that you find is that, well, I'm making comments for myself on all of these stories. It's sometimes hard to provide valuable feedback in just a few lines in the time that you have. And so I dropped that, and I'm sorry for it, because I know a lot of people like the feedback or like to get feedback, not that they like our feedback necessarily. And my feedback was very, very blunt. So some people don't like that either, even though I warned them about it. So now I have a checkbox where people can ask for feedback, and occasionally I will give it, but it really depends on, do I have time that day? Is there something particularly, in my view, valuable that I can say about the story? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And reading all the way.
Recording in progress.
That's interesting. That should have been, that's
The
just
new
for one
person.
thing. Yeah. I used to read everything all the way because there's always the hope that even though the story hasn't started well, there's a gangbuster ending and it's terrific.
Yeah.
All right, great, I can
hope.
work with that. Yeah. And that's true sometimes. And I think for several years, 3-4 years, I read everything all the way through. And every now and then that was true. And I would say, hey, this didn't start very well, but I really think that it's a pretty good package. And so we can work with that. But most of the time it's not. And if you weigh the chance of there being something good at the end against the cost of reading, 20 stories a day all the way to the end, some of which are 10,000 words, it takes a lot of time. So that's one of the things that I'm sorry that we dropped. But the fact is, usually within a paragraph or a page, I can have a feeling of whether this story is going to work out. I read beyond that. And I read, the way I do it is that I read to 2 points. I mark down at one point, the first point where I don't think this story is going to work. Sometimes that's page 1, sometimes that's page 5, sometimes it's not at all. And then I keep reading. And when I get to a second point where really, really this is not going to work, then I stop reading. And it varies a lot. It's often about 5 pages, I'd say. But usually within the first page, you can get a sense of, all right, the prose isn't that great, or, it's zombie werewolf time travel, or something else that's just not going to work out. So yeah, I think that it would be great if we could all read all the way through, but it just doesn't pay off on a percentage basis.
If I could ask another question, or actually, let's say, pair of questions, because they relate. So one would be, as editors, what would you like to see more of? Maybe you're getting too many stories in one category, but what's something you'd like to see more of? And then the other is just, in general, what advice would you give to emerging writers that they need to hear?
Well, let's take those one at a time. I'll take the first one first and then give Fran a shot at it. I'd like to see more, I say sometimes epic fantasy, but maybe high fantasy is better because we are talking about short stories here. And yeah, I mean, you can do epic fantasy in a short story, and I'd like to see more of that. But high fantasy as well. There's a lot of urban fantasy, contemporary fantasy, that kind of thing, and that's fine. I like that, but you know, I like to see the you know, great epic, real heavy fantasy stuff without it turning into a D&D story, because I get a lot of those as well, with, you know, elves and dwarves and there's a magic ring, and you know, you get that kind of thing, or somebody who clearly is turning their D&D game into a story, which is probably fun for them, but it's not that fun to read. So I'd like
I
to
have a
see more.
suggestion.
Yeah.
If you like high fantasy and you want it shorter than Tolkien's masterpiece, somebody needs to hold a Lord Dunsany contest, because as you know, his best fantasy is written in very short chunks, right?
Mhm.
Most of his more famous stories are 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 words long.
You know, yeah, that's, for me, that's too short. I mean, we do accept above 500 words, but I find that in practice, it's very hard to tell a flash story that satisfies me as a story. It's certainly possible, people do it, but most of the flash stuff that we get is a mood piece, or it's a scene. It's not a full story, in my view. Other magazines are much more focused on flash, and those are good places to send those. But for me, 3,000 words is a practical low limit. We publish stuff that's less than that. We publish some great things that are less than that. But in practical terms, I guess that's kind of where it starts feeling like, okay, this is a complete story. The other thing that I'd like to see more of is really, you know, this the poetic lyrical prose. We get some of that, but it's interesting. The people who write that way aren't always the best storytellers, and so you get something that's, wow, that was beautifully written, but so what? There's no story there. Nothing happened. Nothing changed. The character didn't evolve. So it's sometimes hard to find a marriage of those two things. Fran?
Well, I do like high fantasy too, but I find that it's really, really hard to find ones that are well written, that aren't somehow copies of all the great things that are there. And to do them within a short story form, I think is very difficult too. There's been a couple that we've gotten like that, but only a couple over time. I would like to see more real hard science fiction stories. And sometimes people submit a story and say it's hard science fiction when it's really not at all. You know, you'd want to see the real scientific facts and see them used in the story and make a difference in the story, and that the person really is conversant in what they're talking about. And yeah, I'd like to see more of that for sure. We get almost no stories that we can really call Eldritch, which is, again, I think last time we talked about what is Eldritch, and I think Andrew liked the term liminal, but liminal, spooky, maybe a little hair-raising, ghostly and eerie, but not horror. So that's really, really hard to find. So I'd like more of that too. We also accept poetry. So, and I find that the poetry that we would be looking for requires like a finer attention to word choice than most poems generally use today. Aside from that, we would take also artwork, but no AI generated work. We're going to put that in our requirements. Okay, I think that's it in general terms.
Okay. And then Ron's second question, I think, was advice to writers, or advice to beginning writers, and I don't recall exactly. So Fran, why don't you go ahead and tackle that?
I think one thing is not to try and write a story like a story you really love. If you really love Lord of the Rings, that's great, but it'll kind of be obvious if you're writing something influenced by that. And everybody has their own possibilities of what they can write and their own possible contributions that nobody else can do. So concentrate on what you really care about. Like, if you have something that you're really passionate about, that's good. Put that into the story, because that's something that will get the readers involved. If you really care about what you're writing, then it'll show in your story. And the other thing is not to be afraid to write what you would really like to see. Sometimes it's like writers are shy and they say, wow, I'm thinking of this and this and this. And oh no, I don't dare put that on in a story and send it out. Concentrate on what you care about, but also be hard on yourself in terms of when it's ready to send out. Be critical of yourself after you've got it written. Write and write and write. And then after that, go back and edit. Get the inspiration out. Let all these words come out on the page. And then you can always go back and edit. And that's the more logical side of things. But get the emotion and the inspiration out first, I would say.
My answer, I'm going to say a couple of things that I think you'll have heard many times before. One of them is read. You can see this is part of my library. I read a lot. And I don't think you have to necessarily read in an analytical way. And it doesn't have to be science fiction and fantasy either. You read anything you want, but after a while you develop some ideas of, hey, I like that, or this is attractive to me. And it just kind of works its way into your own process. I'm not saying that you read something and think, okay, I'm going to write like this. I want to write like Shakespeare. I want to write like John Morrissey or Larry Niven. You don't have to do that. Just read a lot, and gradually that will work its way in. You'll learn what you like and what you don't like, and the way you write doesn't necessarily have a direct relationship to what you like to read. I read, I like Isaac Asimov, for example, or Jack Vance, but I don't think I can write like either of those two. Asimov is fairly straightforward and simple language, and I'm better with more complex, flowery language. Vance makes up all these concepts and characters and approaches, and I just don't think I can do that. So I enjoy reading those things, but I don't write that way. But reading all sorts of things is the first step. The second step that I learned as a writer is to take it seriously and treat it like work. I used to wait around and think, okay, when I've got the inspiration and I've got the idea and I've got the time and I've got the opportunity, I'm going to sit down and write this great story. 20 years, they never happened at the same time. I mean, I think I literally wrote one story over 20 years. Lots of ideas, and I thought, I'll get to these later when I have the opportunity. And then at one point I was between jobs, and I said, all right, when my spouse goes out the door in the morning, I'm going to sit down at the desk and I'm going to sit there all day long and write. And usually what would happen before that is that I would open up my file of prompts and ideas, and I would spend about an hour futzing around, looking at old stories. Here's the start of a story. And I'd read it and remember what I was writing and trying to do. And then I would get bored and go off and read something else. And after an hour, I'd give up. And when I sat down and said, I'm going to be here all day, I still spent the first hour wasting my time futzing around. And then after that, I found that I actually did something. And it was amazing to me. It's not particularly surprising, but to me, it was like a real eye-opener. Like, oh my God, if I really sit here for a long time and force myself to write, then it starts to come out. And then I started writing a story a day. I'm not saying they were good, but I was like, wow, a complete story every day for 2 weeks or something. That's more than I've done in the last 20 years. So really just sitting down and taking it seriously. The benefit of that, for me at least, is that having now done that for quite a long time, I don't need to do the hour of futzing around anymore. I can sit down and write pretty much whenever I want, and write in generally the quality that I feel is worthwhile. There's certainly days that it's just not working. I can't come up with it. It's not going to work out. But most of the time I can sit down and say, okay, I've got a half hour. I can write something. I wanted to, though, also to respond to something that Fran said, and I think her advice is good, but I think it's interesting, some advice that Gene Wolfe had, which I've suggested to a number of people, and I've tried once or twice, which is to take a story that by somebody else that you like. And this is only as an exercise, obviously you're not going to submit this. He suggests one of his own stories, but take a story that you like, read it, close the book, and rewrite that story. And it's got to be something really reasonably short. But the idea is to, not that you're ever going to sell this because you've just literally copied somebody's story, but to write your story, do it all the way through as best you can, and then do some analysis. Open up the Gene Wolfe story, look at your story, and see where they're different. Is it because he made different word choices than you did? Is it because he emphasized different things? Is it because his characters are more or less engaging or more or less developed? What is it that he did differently? Now, this is only useful as an exercise because you're not trying to be Gene Wolfe. You're going to write, as Fran says, in your own way. And the more you write, the more you find what your most comfortable voice is. At least that's how it's worked for me. I write a lot of different things, but over time I've come around to, okay, this is the kind of thing that feels most comfortable to me. And it's not a copy of anybody else. But the purpose of the exercise is to do some analysis and maybe find out, okay, I really like Gene Wolfe and I like this story, but I did it this way. Why is that? Did I do something better or different? Is it more in my voice and am I emphasizing different things, or are there things that I could learn now that I'm looking at this very analytically? So.
Oh, I'd just like to add that more what you said about taking the writing seriously. Yeah, I found that if I just wait for, I have the ideas, but if I actually sit down, take pen to paper, or sit at the keyboard and just start writing, it starts flowing. You just have to kind of get it going, and then the words will come out a lot better.
Yeah.
It's the initial thing of sitting down, being serious, doing the writing, and that helps. Yeah.
Thank you both, and I apologize. I'm being summoned away. I'll say goodbye. I hope to join more of these and to submit to you both. And thank you for your valuable time and insight.
All right, thanks, Ron.
Thank you for joining. Yeah, thank you.
Peach, questions from you?
Well, I think I had my initial. Oh, I had. Well, I think I had one question for Fran, and that was, where do you stand in terms of poetry on the issue of rhyming and alliteration? In other words,
yeah,
what most people think of as 19th century poetry.
I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It can come out very bad, but as far as the technique, that's fine. It's what you do with it.
No, but I'm
good words in there are bad.
Have you actually published any rhymed poetry? Are you speaking theoretically, or do you have practical experience in actually publishing rhymed poetry? Because a lot of people are consciously or subconsciously prejudiced against rhyming these days because it's
well, I'm not
style or old-fashioned.
I'm not prejudiced against rhyming, but there was one well-written poem, but it needed more work, and I gave feedback on that, and that was definitely a rhyming poem, in very specific form.
But you didn't publish it.
because they needed to work on it further, and I invited them to resubmit when they'd worked on it further.
Oh, but you never heard back. That's interesting.
Not yet, but you never know. I mean, someone could, you can invite somebody to rewrite a story, and then you don't hear from them for a year, and then they resubmit. Hey, this is the one you had made comments on. It's like, oh yeah, but also that given our rate of acceptance and how few poems are submitted to begin with, and how few of those are rhyming poems, it's not likely that we will have published one.
Yeah, well, because I just served on the inaugural Risling Award jury in the short poem category this year. And we had over 100 poems that were nominated, of which, if I recall, exactly 2 were conventional rhymed poems, and both of those were sonnets, which is another big no-no for people who are looking for more modern or
both of those were
expressions.
Sonnets.
Both of those were what?
Sonnets, 14 lines. Sonnet.
Oh, sonnets. Okay, sonnets.
Shakespearean sonnets.
Yeah.
So only 2 of the 103 poems that we were asked to evaluate were actually rhyme. There were some unintentional rhymes or accidental rhymes in some of the other 101 poems, but there were only 2 out of 103. And I've been working the last couple of years on what I call appreciations of the masters in poetry, where I copy their style, or not so much copy the style, but take an idea for a poem that Edgar Allan Poe or somebody wrote, and then try and turn it into something of my own. But over the last year, I wrote a whole bunch of these, and like the poems on which they not on which they were based, although in some cases they might actually be based on the poem, but which inspired them. I wrote all these rhymed poems, and now I don't know what to do with them because, of course, I've got like 10 or 20 poems. But the good news is that the 7 or 8 that I was thinking about, that I hadn't figured out how I wanted to do my appreciation, all of those and every one that I do from now on is not going to have any kind of they may have some accidental rhymes, because I still like accidental rhymes that sort of sneak into the middle of a line, but aren't real, don't show up at the end of any 2 lines, because that's way too obvious and apparently way out of style. But I've now got some unrhymed appreciation poems, which is catching up on the last 100 years of published poetry in this country and many others. So I thought I had a question for Morris as well. What was my question for Morris? Oh, I think you actually have it in your. Oh, I was wondering. You don't have a place on your. You use Moksha, right?
Yeah.
Maybe both of you use Moksha, but in any event, or no, you have you're an X, Fran. That means you have your own submission form. But he uses Moksha like a lot of other people. And on your form, you're so different from everyone else in so many different ways. There's no room for a cover letter, and there's no room for a biography.
Yep.
And are those supposed to go in the submission, or you just don't even want to bother with that until after you've decided if you like the story?
I don't want to know anything about the author until I've decided whether I like the story. In fact, that was
because that was my question, is whether I should start writing you cover letters.
Absolutely not.
Putting them at the front of the story.
No, some people do that, and that's exactly what I don't want. In fact, I made a special request to the developer of Moksha, Matt Kressel, to remove the cover letter field, because people would put in cover letters and I didn't read them. I mean, they literally are not visible to me. And it doesn't tell me anything I want to know. After I've decided to offer a rewrite, then I'd like to get to know a little bit about the author, and I ask them questions. What were you trying to do? What was the purpose of the story, etc. But then if I accept a story, then I'll ask for a bio, etc. at the end of the whole process. But I specifically do not want a cover letter or any kind of a bio or any other information about the author until I've read and shown interest in the story.
Ah, interesting. So that's one other alternative strategy shot down. Well, at least I didn't waste time on trying to sneak something into whatever my next submission might be.
No, in fact, if you did that, I would send you back.
Yeah, because, well, like a lot of people say you could have a cover letter form, whether it's moksha or not, and they say we don't. There's at least one out there, I can't remember who it is, but they say we don't read your cover letter until after we've decided to accept your story. But if you want to write one, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I don't read it at all, so it's easier just not to have a field.
Have a space for it, which makes it easier for everyone concerned.
Yeah, well, that was, as I said, a
All
specific
right, well,
request.
that's it for me, unless you guys want to give more lectures
Well, I
on your own audience.
we also ask that no information about the author be included, no bio. We don't want to hear about past anything, and we don't want to hear a
Do you have a
description
bio
of the
on your
story
website?
either. All we want is a certain amount of information. Some people ignore that, but yeah, we want to judge a story on the story itself, not what someone has done in the past.
Right. No, I understand, but am I correct, or am I mistaken that your website, as part of the login procedure, gives you the opportunity to fill out a biofield, which is completely separate from any submissions?
No, there's a comment field that we say, if you have any information that's related to the story, like you're a mad scientist and you write a story about a mad scientist, you write about an astrophysicist,
yeah,
and you
you
are
know
an
professional
astrophysicist, or a particular event and you were at that event. Those kind of things are relevant to the story. We don't want to hear anything else. People have often ignored that and, put in.
I'm pretty sure I've ignored that as well, because normally when they have combined the cover letter and the bio in any form on a submission form, I usually put a cover letter, which is usually just a couple of words or a sentence, and then I just automatically put a short bio in afterwards. But
yeah, no,
apparently that's another violation of editorial prerogatives that I keep getting cut. But then I try and make notes of when I improperly follow editorial advice or instructions, because every editorial submission page is different. And what they're looking for in terms of stories is different, and the form they want it in is different, and the information that they want in association is different. So, for example, Morris wants absolutely no information whatsoever. He wants a story, and that's what he wants. So, but yeah, especially I've been applying, getting all these new, mostly literary journals. I have most of the science fiction and fantasy ones already in my spreadsheet, but including the critical information, which is mostly numerical about submission requirements. But I should have a link to the submission page for every journal as a separate field in my spreadsheet, so that I can look at that or look it up quickly. Because when you're submitting things, because SFWA or this Eureka lady, and there's several people who actually send out monthly newsletters with calls, whole bunches of calls on them. But if you're going down these lists, normally you have to decide whether to look and then whether to submit, but actually reading the submission page for every journal over again every month or every 6 months is not something that I do, or that probably anyone does. But then you waste everyone's time by not following the instructions.
Yeah, frankly, my advice on that, and certainly what I do, is every time I go to a journal's page, I read their submission guidelines again, in case they've changed, in case it's different, whatever, even if I submitted to them, 2 weeks ago. and I still make mistakes occasionally, but I think it's important to, as I always say, the guidelines tell you what they want, and why submit something to them that they don't want.
Right. The closer you get to what they ask for, the better your chances of getting bumped up from that 0% to 1% or 3%, or it doesn't get very much higher than 3% in most cases. But you're going to stay closer to 0%. The more mistakes you make, and the fewer of their expectations that you meet on the surface, let alone asking you to read your 10,000 word magnum opus, right?
Right.
One of my
Okay.
cats does that too.
Yeah.
That's not a tuxedo cat. That's all black, right?
It's all black. I've got two cats that are all black. They look almost exactly the same. So it's taken a little while to learn how they
And you
act.
know them now. They're sufficiently different in terms of personality. You can tell them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can tell by their sound and by the way they move around.
What are they called?
Ash and Cinder.
Ash
Ah,
and Cinder.
We had,
See,
I live in Oregon, and we had a
that's
big
exactly
fire
what I
just before.
expected. They have to have like some kind of syncopated names.
Yeah, exactly.
Ash and Cinder.
And they're
Very nice.
sisters.
Well, meow, Ash or Cinder.
All
See you
right.
guys.
Fran, any closing words?
oh, just that I have two black cats also, but they have long fluffy fur.
It's funny. One of my authors, if you will, someone who has published in our magazine, has two cats that look exactly like mine. And this person is, posts things on Twitter. I'm like, how did you get my cats? Those look just like my cats. So, not that uncommon, I guess. All right. Well, thank you all for participating. I apologize again for the problems yesterday, but we'll be back on schedule in the next one in June. Looking forward to seeing you all there.
Bon appetit.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.